cotton, American cotton, back into the mill. That's a pretty interesting kind of dynamic. So this is cotton weaving in the Eclipse Mill in North Adams. And Betty has moved here from Woodstock area, and before that she studied at the MICA, which is in Baltimore, right? And New York City at the Fashion Institute and other places. I think what's also interesting is that the technology of the jacquard weavings are, they're 1780s approximately as a technology in France, and the subject matter, many of these are graffiti, which America kind of saw as junk, and the French really embraced very early on. So there's kind of a cross-pollination here of very sophisticated technology, old techniques, and the fact that we're bringing back cotton to the Eclipse Mill. So with that, in terms of details, and we're also glad that this is being videoed, by the way, because we've had so many good talks which have disappeared down the sewer. So this is a great opportunity. So this is Betty, and for those who want to introduce themselves afterwards, go right ahead. And
okay, thank you, Ralph, very much. I really would like to start off with a couple of thank yous. One is to Ralph Brill for his wonderful curatorial eye getting us started, and all the other help that he's been. And Rick Harlow is not able to be here tonight, but he helped install. He was the installer, with me sitting comfortably, saying, no, just a little over there, wait, please. And he did a wonderful job. And to Roman Iwasika, who has documented this show in photographs, and he's elsewhere occupied, so I don't think he can do it. And I had the help of Andrew, my partner in crime and everything else in life, who, chief schlepper and helper and moral supporter and all that good stuff. And everyone in this community. And I'm feeling very celebratory because exactly 1 year ago today, and by coincidence, on June 7th, my movers deposited me here at the mill in my new surroundings in my new home. And I'm very happy to have landed with home. It's really great. What I'm doing here with this work is using a very ancient technology that goes back to great history. It's a bit of a toss-up as to whether textile techniques or pottery developed first in human history, but I know that at least 9,000 or 10,000 years ago in Turkey there were shards with the imprint of ropes and threads around clay pots that were made. So those technologies evolved from those early days as a way of helping people do what they needed to do to live. Cooking pots or clothing or strings to hang things up with, etc. I am a hand weaver, the current work notwithstanding, and everything in this room evolves out of my work with hand weaving over the years. I love building an image. I'm really a painter. I love building an image with threads where I can create optical mixtures of color to render my image. And somebody once asked me, why don't you just paint it? Wouldn't it be faster? Wouldn't it be easier? Yeah, it would, but it wouldn't be nearly as much fun for me, for whatever it is that I need as an artist, to slow me down, make me carefully consider every mark I make, every color I use, every line I use. What's different about this process from the ones I make on my hand looms, where it can take me 3 months to make a piece the size of the, let's say 3 by 5 feet, 4 by 5 feet. It can take me 3 months of working several hours a day to really weave something by hand. And I love that process. I'm nose to nose with the threads. I have the threads in my hand. This removes me from the weaving process because these pieces were woven on high-speed machinery at the mill of North Carolina. They were fabricated for me, much the way a sculptor will have to hand off a wax figure to a foundry and say, okay, now you have to cast this for me in bronze. So I prepare the image on my computer. I sketch with the camera. So I have a digital image already. I can bring it into Photoshop. I can work with it in any way I wish as an image. And when I feel that my image is the way I want it, then it gets brought into a weaving software that ultimately controls the loom that makes this. And so every pixel in my image that I created gets translated into threads for weaving. And normally I like to ask people not to touch the weaving. It's so tempting with textiles. You just want to pick it up and you also want to look behind and see how it feels. I have a please touch example here. That's just the way it came off the loom. So, and it's a slice of this image. And you can see how much it was railroaded or woven sideways. The warp or lengthwise threads are actually sideways in this piece, so that I could get the maximum size on the loom for it. But you can see how much it lost in the finishing process after washing and steaming and blocking and hemming and lining, all of that. It's not quite as wide as this long strip. You're welcome to handle this and flip it over and see what the back looks like and see what it feels like. It was woven on a jacquard loom, which it's a digital process, and it was even when it was woven, when it was developed in France, in Lyon, in the silk industry. Jacquard worked in that industry. I believe he's said to have worked as a draw boy, which means the person who sits up at the top of one of these elaborate looms manipulates the rods to which are attached threads that ultimately, in groups and sequences, create elaborate patterns. So if you imagine an elaborate floral pattern on a damask tablecloth, it comes out of that way of drawing up only certain threads to create a pattern. In the silks that were created in those days, they were very fine threads, very expensive materials, a very slow process, and maybe only a few inches a day to be woven with that, in that laborious way. Something occurred to him that, well, couldn't this be mechanized so that rather than somebody hollering up to the guy perched on the top of the loom, this or that, and the weavers down below, that you have like a punch card system. From that evolved present-day computers because it moved right through calculating machines. Babbage worked with that idea. Then you had the IBM punch cards. It's a binary system. It's either the thread is up or it's down, on, off, yes, no. And it's like a player piano with those little things that go through the loops. So that simple idea, the cards were punched in strips and then lashed together, and then they kind of fed over a thing with pegs. And if the peg found a hole, it went through, and it told the loom to do one thing. If it didn't find a hole, it didn't, and that told the loom to do the other thing, up or down, yes or no. When this was invented, it speeded up the process of weaving so much that it was kind of irresistible, like a lot of technological changes. And bottom line is the draw boys all lost their jobs. There were riots. And from this time we get our word sabotage. Why? Because the sabots, the wooden shoes that the workers wore, were thrown into machinery to jam and slow the work. So that's what sabotage is. You've just introduced a little something that doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to. So in spite of all that, the technology advanced. Jacquard was given an award, a lifetime pension by Napoleon. And I don't know if he died a rich man or not, but that's kind of the story of that invention. Now, and I remember going to Patterson, New Jersey when I took a textile design course many years ago, where they were still using punch cards, and those were punched by hand on kind of a graph paper-like grid. But when computers became commonly used, everything became digital in that way. You don't need the physical card anymore. You just need the digital instructions. So These were woven on a loom that's about 8 feet wide, and it's actually called a weaving machine, and it's about this tall. That's the first part of it. Then on a catwalk on the next story sit a couple of big boxes with the jacquard heads where the electronic instructions tell the orange nylon cords reaching down to every single individual thread on the weaving machine, raise or not, lift or not. And so my digital image through the weaving software is fed to those controllers on the top, and out comes an individual image. You don't have to do a pattern repeat like a floral textile, although you could. This loom can weave a bedspread if it needs to. It does whatever you tell it to. So that's kind of the short summary of the technology. I'm fascinated by things that I see. I don't always know why I like what I'm seeing, but the camera enables me to just go boom and capture it and not think about it. And I like working with an image that I don't think about too much. I follow my gut feeling, because we know our gut is smarter than this one up here a lot of the times. It's telling us something important, but we then tend to criticize, edit, fuss, think around, oh, it's not good enough, oh, I don't know, I should do this. But if you quickly grab it and freeze it, then you've got something you can work with. Then you can dink around and edit and play and say, no, you know what, my first instinct was right. What this process also tells me is what I'm seeing and why I like what I'm seeing. And I think we're surrounded constantly by environments where there's stuff that we don't consider to be beautiful or particularly interesting or meaningful, but it is. And when I walk these mill floors, they're wonderful. They're scarred and scratched from everything that went on here, every piece of machinery that got dragged through here, every person whose tread made a sound, every worker who showed up and did something here made a mark somewhere. And we leave our histories behind us constantly, everywhere, consciously or unconsciously. So what's in this room are the stories that I find in pavements, floors, walls, etc. Some are overt and conscious. Some may be overt and conscious, but they're saying something that somebody like myself will come along and read differently. And that's what I like about art. It's open to interpretation by whoever sees it. So you're looking at several environments. One is Virginia, Lynchburg, where I did a residency. And my empty studio awaited me when I showed up, and the morning light was always wonderful and fascinating, and that space was empty because it was not my studio. I was a guest artist using it for a while, and it was empty. That can make you panic and freeze if you've ever done a residency and walked in and said, now what do I do? Yes, it can do that, but it also invites you to just be spacious and quiet and to let things open up for you. So that's what these photographs were about for me on the left. From here around to this piece and two long ones on this wall, you're looking at some walks I took in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it's a wonderfully clean and neat and respectable city with a lot of nice architecture and so on. But any city has its back streets or a back wall near a parking lot where people have had a chance to make their mark and mess things up a little bit. And I just fell in love with the graffiti that I found in that city. It was amazing. And this one is called Don't Forget. It was in the art school where I was a visiting artist. And the art school is in a series of historic buildings downtown where they've just broken through the walls and joined the buildings, which were built together anyway. Opened up those walkways again, and you just pass from one building to another to the different classrooms. And so this wall was just, it's maybe a little larger than life, but it was 2 or 3 feet thick. It had been painted black. Somebody had written on it with chalk or paint. Somebody had erased it, but not completely. And so I stopped to look at it, and when I finally made out the letters, I realized it said, "Don't forget to play." And I thought, wow, what a nice thing to say. Yeah. And there it was in an art school where people were being creative and getting trained in whatever it was they wanted to study. So I loved it. And so there's that piece. And you can make out the letters if you look very, very carefully. This is "Don't forget to play." And this was just a real trashy looking piece of fence. And obviously I'm attracted to texture, fiber junkie. And I loved the texture of the fence with the light coming through it and the weeds behind it and some trash was blown against it and there were these wonderful shadows and then the pavement had creases. So everything can become a wonderful abstract composition if you just look. And so that's that piece is. And so as you look at these pieces, you see what people have done to leave a mark on places where they've been, either throwing their trash down without a thought, or those paving stones in that image were in the square near the art school. Very, very old cobblestones. It must have been the town market back in the day, the 17 or 1800s, and they're so worn and beautiful. And the students stand there hanging out, and then the cigarette butt goes flying down, and they accumulate in the cracks. And so I call it history, because it's the layers of time, one generation after another, doing things in that place. Starting over there with the feet, and around to the other feet. You're looking at North Carolina, and you're looking at the mill where these pieces were woven. And the second time I went down there and had some work woven, I became fascinated with the space itself and the great concrete floors and beautiful abstract designs that I saw there. And on one occasion, I was trying to photograph kind of the glow of the light on the sheen of it on the cement. And people were standing around talking, and they were kind of in my way. And I thought, well, I'll just photograph it the way it is. I'll crop out the feet later. It's okay. But I realized the feet are the story in those three pieces, because there's a conversation going on between two individuals in each one of them. And all you need is those feet to tell you what's going on. And they were wonderful compositions. And I realized that's the piece. So they obviously did not get cropped out. And usually I'm known for abstraction in my work, and those abstract pieces are the beautiful designs I saw in North Florida. How is this made? I've explained a little bit that there's a loom that weaves it. It's set up, this particular loom on which all these pieces were made, was set up with a rotation of 6 colors in the warp, or the lengthwise threads that are on. They put 12,000 yards of yarn on the loom at once. It's a huge drum that stands this high with 6 colors, red, yellow, blue, green, black, and white. And there are fine threads, and it's in this Please Touch sample that I've hung up here. The wefts in all these cases were just black or white. And what you bring to the surface is what you see when you pick your colors. And so the artist's job, in bringing this into a digital process that can be woven, is to work with a color blanket with samples of every color that can be achieved on this loom setup, with those 6 warp colors and 2 weft colors. And so part of what I do, laboriously, before it ever goes to the mill, is to select which black, which navy blue, which red, which orange is going to render my image. So I am coloring these in such a way that the loom knows how to weave it and give me that image. And so that's what you see in the sample, and you're welcome to touch it, turn it over, and see what the back looks like. Whatever's not on the front, those other colors are showing somewhere on the back.
Do they give you a draft or a sample?
Pardon?
Do they give you a sample or glue before they go run the whole thing?
No, but what you can do is just leave a slice of it like that, just a little bit, to see how. So, no, I go down there, and and I'm standing there, the artist is not allowed to touch the loom. There's a loom technician who manages everything. He runs the loom. You're not allowed to touch any equipment at all, but there's a little short catwalk that you can stand on in front of the loom. They ask that you keep your hands behind your back. They don't want to lose a finger when you're weaving. And you're also given these earplugs, these neon green earplugs from the dispenser by the door when you enter, because if there's a running loom, they want you to protect your ears. So you stand there looking like Shrek, and you're allowed to watch your weaving just roll off the loom at an alarming speed. If you're a hand weaver, it's like going from a horse and buggy to a Lamborghini that can go 20 miles an hour or something. It's like, whoa. It's so fast and wonderful because you can see your ideas develop quickly in that way. And you can just weave enough to tell, is it coming out right, or do I need to go back to the computer, pick different colors, change the way I'm doing things, emphasize that shadow, lighten or darken something. So you have the opportunity to not weave something that's not coming out the way you like it. And after working this way for a while, you gain a measure of control. But I also have to say I've been fortunate that the first time I went, I did one piece in 4 different colorways. And that taught me what I needed to know about the way my colors were going to come out. So that's the process. So what I'm doing is using an industrial process to make fine art. These are one-off pieces. They will never be woven again. And although I could replicate something, that's not my intention. So the process is a little bit photographic. It's a little bit like printmaking, except it's an addition of 1. And they are unique. And they are really ultimately back to being about the image and what that image has to say. For me, without the image, there's nothing. The image and the idea of the image and what's embedded in it is what's important. I like working this way because of the way I love building an image with color, and I like the tactile quality of fibers. But I could, they could be photographs, but somehow they're richer when they become an object that's woven for me. So that's what it is. And when I moved to North Adams and began learning about this community, I was very excited to hear about the textile history that had been here. I think every place where there's been industry that has died or moved overseas or changed in some way, there's loss and regret and a feeling of sadness. And North Adams has been through a number of upheavals and losses of jobs and so on. It's a very resilient community, though, and very beautiful community of people. And so what I want to do next is honor North Adams, my new environment, with something that connects with that history. I've already connected with the physical space of the mill where my work is going. And I don't know if this will work out or not, but art's about risk-taking. I want to create a piece that's a memory piece. And around the corner here is a little place where I left a basket of cotton scraps. And I invite everyone to think about the mills of North Adams. If you knew somebody who worked here that you'd like to commemorate, if they're deceased and you want to commemorate them. If they're living, you might want to just write down their first or last name. I don't want to violate anyone's privacy, but I want to remember the people who have worked in this town and made it what it is and have contributed to the industries that were here. We are now in a repurposed mill building, which is the next incarnation of what these buildings can become and what this town can become. So things do change, and we lose technologies and all of that, but we can also still inhabit the richness that exists and enjoy it and appreciate it. So I invite you to write down a name, a word, a date, something that evokes for you in your memory or imagination, something about the mills of North Adams. And so there's a little basket of fabric scraps over here. a little blotter where you can tape it down so it won't wiggle while you write on it. I have already started the process by writing the name of Henry Brooks, who autographed one of the floors in this building, my kitchen floor as it happens, with nails on September 1st, 1923. So I wrote one piece that says 1923, and I wrote another piece that says Henry Brooks. So you get the idea. It can be about the conditions in the mills. It could be about how people felt. Were they old or young? Were they children? Were they tired? Was it hot or cold when they worked here? What did they do? What did they make? What kind of tools did they handle? So just any evocative words, and I'm going to construct some sort of three-dimensional, perhaps it would be like an artist book, memory piece about the mills, or it might take a form. I don't know that form yet. That's going to depend on what people contribute. So I invite everybody to participate in any way you wish in this project. And there's a little thing over here to write down what you might like to contribute and drop it in the box. And I'll use those materials to make the piece. So did I leave anything out, or does anybody?
I just want to emphasize that the color translation from the photograph to the textile is much more difficult than she's making it out to be. If you look at these colors, there are no solid colors in these. She's dithering like crazy. She's creating the colors by mixing threads close to each other. You know, if you look at, there's all kinds of little colors running throughout those modulated surfaces. So it's just, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, it's not just scanning a photograph and plugging it into a printing machine.
That's where the fun is for me.
Yeah.
Getting that, rendering that image.
Yeah. It's an illusion. She's taking a fixed number of colors and creating a whole gradation of colors.
So kind of following up on that, I'm curious what your history of the practice of hand weaving brings to this mechanical process. What do you do that somebody who's never done that could
You mean what do I
never
do in
bring?
my hand that leads to this, or?
What does that history bring to this mechanized process that somebody without it wouldn't know to
That's a
do?
good question, because part of me, I am a very tactile person. I love having my hands on the materials, and for those of us who make art of any kind, our relationship to our materials is important, whatever that is, whether it's photography or something physical like clay or fiber or paint on the surface. And we choose what we choose to do because it attracts us. I was initially trained as a painter. That's what I studied in art school, drawing and painting. And after art school, I had to get a job to support myself and paint in my spare time. And it took a while getting going, and it was not going anywhere. And then I had a little period of unemployment. I was working in publishing, and there's probably nobody who worked in publishing who didn't get laid off at some point. So rather than sitting around feeling devastated, I thought, well, I've got some time on my job hunt. I'll do something I've always wanted to do. And what popped into my mind was to learn to weave. Somehow that idea had been planted when I passed a weaving classroom, and was just my head swiveled around, and I looked at all the colored threads and so on. So I thought, I'd like to do that, and it's non-challenging. It's not really art, so I'll do it, right? So I learned to weave, and the minute my hands touched the threads, I was hooked. I loved handling those materials, and I thought, well, why isn't it art? Why not? And then I took some classes in handling dyes. And what I do in my handwork is I dye the threads, I paint on them, and then I weave into them. So anybody who would love a studio visit, I'd be glad to make an appointment and have you stop in and see what that looks like on my handlooms. So it's a combination of dye painting and tapestry weaving. And at some point I did work for a weaver, a tapestry weaver, who worked in classical methods of tapestry where the warp is just a support for the weft, and it's completely covered by the weft, which is all packed down around the warp threads. But I learned a great deal about many things working in that studio, not the least of which was color mixing, because I saw that we were working on a loom 10 feet wide, she did big commissions and a big roller beam at the top and another at the bottom, so 3 or 4 weavers could sit side by side. And you use multiple strands of colors to get your mixtures, and I was always playing it safe, putting together colors that I thought looked good together, and then I saw the weaver next to me take the most hideous orange and then a weird green and something else, and she blended it, and it was like magic. And so that woke up my eye as to what I could do with color, and I just freely experimented from then on with color. And so working with mixing color in that way, when I heard, and I was trying to both work within the grid and get away from it and be very painterly. So when I heard about the jacquard weaving that was becoming available to artists, I perked up and I took some workshops to learn the technique. And I went to Montreal 2 or 3 times where they have a textile school and they teach jacquard. And then I went to the Jacquard Center, and that's where I began having my work fabricated. So that color mixing of threads, blending to create an image, came out of my hand weaving, out of tapestry, traditional tapestry, into, and I think it's because I studied at the Fashion Institute of Technology. I took textile design classes where the wovens were dress fabrics, yardage, and you could see both the warp and the weft. I like that better than covering up the warp because you got the color mixtures. And so if you have ever studied the beauty of a complex plaid and the way the colors go in and out of one another, and amazing things happen because this color has to cross that one whether you think they look good or not, and guess what they do? You know, they make something else happen when they crisscross. So I've always been attracted to that, and that's how this came out of that. So when I had the chance to work in this way with, you know, colored warp, I didn't get to choose the colors, but I got to work with them. And every art medium has its limitations that it imposes on you, whether it's the size of your paper, or the width of the loom, or the amount of strength you have in your shoulders to manipulate a big ball of clay on the wheel, or whatever it is. You're going to have some parameters that you have to deal with. And I've also worked strictly in black and white, which for me, a color junkie, was a real challenge to give up color for a while, just work in black and white. And I learned a great deal and got stronger as an artist for having done it. And so anytime you take a chance and go out on them and explore that next thing, enlarging the art. I don't know if that answers the question or not. I apologize, it was a bit long. Any other questions?